Palena Neale, welcome to the Human Capital Innovations Podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here, John.
Yeah, it's great to be with you. You're joining us from Paris, France. I'm south of Salt Lake City in Utah. So it's morning for me. It's getting into the evening for you. Today, we're going to be talking about networking for career advancement and building your influence. And as I'll share here in just a moment with your bio, you do a lot of work in the women in business and women's leadership space. So we'll also be talking about that. About this topic from that kind of a perspective as well, because of course it's applicable to anyone. Everyone needs to be doing these things, but I think it's especially important for women in the workplace to proactively go about building their networks and developing their own career pathways to achieve the goals that they have, because we know sometimes there are structural disadvantages in place that make it a little bit harder, and so we want to do whatever we can to build a scaffolding around those structural disadvantages to provide more opportunity. As we get started, I wanted to share Palena's bio with everybody. Palena Neale, Ph.D, is a women's leadership coach and educator. She founded Unabridged, a boutique leadership development practice based in Paris, France. She has over 20 years experience designing and delivering leadership development programs for the UN and other nonprofit organizations in Africa, Asia, Europe, and North America. She holds a doctorate in gender and international politics and teaches on a number of different executive education programs. She is an ICF-PCC certified coach and works with clients around the globe who want to have more personal, professional, and social impact. She has been published in Forbes, Psychology Today, and Harvard Business Review, and has recently launched a new online course called Network to Amplify Value for Women who want to amplify their contributions and create more value for themselves and others. What a fantastic background. A pleasure to have you. Anything else you would like to share with me or my audience by way of your background or personal context before we dive on into the conversation?
Well, again, thank you. I'm delighted to be here. Maybe just an additional share. I think, as you rightly point out, I do work in the women's leadership space. However, as you pointed out, this is applicable to anyone. And I want to flag that this is particularly important for introverts, people of certain cultures, and of course, people of certain genders. So it's, and if you're ticking all three of those boxes, it becomes even more critical. So maybe just, mentioning that as well.
Yeah, I think that's a super important reminder. And I'm excited to just dig into this now. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit more about your approach to networking? I know networking is not something a lot of people get a little bit nervous and have anxiety around it. The whole idea of going out and networking is not something they love. So how do we start to reframe that and think about networking for career development, in a more positive light?
Oh, thank you. I mean, absolutely. And I want to start off by saying too, I am an introvert. So this isn't something, I'm not coming at this from the lens or the personality of an extrovert. I feel like I really know firsthand how difficult this can be. So I feel that one of the best ways that we can start to look at this differently, to think about this differently, is to really maybe take a step back and look at what do we need, or what do we mean by advancement in leadership? And I think that sometimes we need to remind ourselves that advancement means that we need to make ourselves and our work visible. And a lot of times people will come to coaching or to trainings with this belief, and sometimes I call it an unhelpful gender myth around, my work will speak for itself. Now, fair enough, this was a success strategy that usually served us well when we were in school and even in university. You did good work, you got good grades. It was more or less that simple. That said, organizational life is so much more complicated, and we really need to be able to have the skills and the tools to be able to navigate that. And that means making yourself and your work visible. So I think that, understanding the context that we're operating in is really important. I also think it's really important, when we're thinking about leadership, to have a holistic understanding of what that means, whether we're thinking about leadership in terms of delivering results. It's also about creating high performing teams, meeting people, leveraging relationships, creating relationships, nurturing talent. It's also about gathering intel so that you can make data informed decisions. And that's not just reading reports, that's also talking to people, gathering information. Leadership is also about creating healthy and inclusive cultures. And to do that, that's about engaging in relationship building. And then delivering results. As a leader, you don't do that alone. You do it through other people. So leadership is all about being in relationship. It's really, in my view, a contact sport. So I think when we start to understand, what we need to do to advance and what leadership is, we can start to understand that there's some very good reasons why we want to do this. We're not doing it just for the sake of doing it. And I find that when people understand the larger context and how it can help them and others, that can be a powerful first step in terms of how we start to see networking differently. So we start to see networking as building relationship and connection, and we want to do that based on generosity and reciprocity.
Yeah. And if I can just comment, because
absolutely.
I absolutely agree that leadership is all about relationships. You're accomplishing things through your team. Leadership is not about everything you do. It's about what you can accomplish through all the people on your team. And that can only happen as you build relationships of mutual accountability and trust, and collaborate effectively with cross-functional teams, across the organization and with other key stakeholders. And so it has to be built on relationships. So I think a lot of times when we think about networking and we cringe, you think about those big networking meetings that people get really uncomfortable about, or you think about, cold contacts on LinkedIn, or like these sorts of things. There's a time and a place for some of those types of activities, but it's much more than that. And it should be, as you described, it should be something that's you're adding value, and it's a reciprocal kind of a relationship that you're developing with people. I don't think there's a whole lot of benefit. Sometimes there can be, but most of the time there's not a whole lot of benefit to just randomly going around and collecting a bunch of business cards from people, right? You want to actually develop meaningful, genuine relationships with people. That's what's going to get you to where you want to go.
Absolutely, John. And there's so, like you say, you want it to be meaningful, you want it to be reciprocal. I always feel it should be based on generosity, but as you mentioned, we have this notion, almost a collective conceptualization of networking in that traditional sense, which has a really bad rap. A lot of people think it's sleazy, they cringe, those large events where you're trying to give out 100 business cards and, people are looking over your shoulder in terms of how to get to the next person. So there's a lot of negativity associated with that. So I think what's very important is we spend some time reflecting on, what are your challenges? What is holding you back from networking? And I, after working now with hundreds of women around the globe, I find that there's more or less three main areas. One is time, one is mindset, and one is know-how. Now, I find that if you actually work on the mindset, the other two almost take care of themselves. So, the time, not enough time, but like I said, it's usually masking something else. The mindset is this, like you rightly pointed out, those images we have of those large networking events. It's sleazy, it's transactional. I don't like doing it. And then a lot of people feel that they just simply don't know what to do. So it's important to pay attention to that. And like I said, I usually start, depending on where people's why not lands, we usually try and do some sort of a reframe. And I have a simple 3R or 3R reframe plan. And what we start to do is we start to examine those limiting beliefs that somebody might hold around networking. What is it you think about when you hear the word networking, et cetera? Spend some time in that, and then, think about somebody who does networking well. And there you start to have start to at least balance out your view of what networking might look like to you. The next thing we want to do is we really want to think about reclaiming the value of reciprocity. Now, networking was never intended to be one-sided, but somehow along the way, it became very one-sided and almost feels transactional. So, what would it feel like if you started to think about your networking in the context or led by the value of reciprocity? And then we also want to think about or recognize our contribution. What do we bring to the relationship? How can you help? And so when you start to think about it like this, you can actually start to reframe, maybe even replace the limiting view of networking that you had, or at a very minimum, you can update your conceptualization of networking to something more useful that's going to serve you and also be more useful for you. So that's one thing you can do, for example, to start to change how you think of networking.
Yeah, I like the mindset shift idea. I think in many aspects of life, we need to practice some self-reflection and go through the process of shifting mindsets and just having a new paradigm in how you look at the world. And I think that applies here too, right? So you've talked about maybe
Absolutely.
a mindset shift around what we even mean by career development, career advancement in the
Mhm.
first place. What are, being really clear about what our career goals are,
Yeah,
and how they relate to other life goals and other aspects, holistically of us as a person as we move forward. I think that's important and often requires a reframing because we get so often caught within kind of the broader social narratives and norms and values of society as a whole, saying these are the things you should be doing. This is the path you should be taking. And that may work for some people. It may not work for you. You may have your own distinct path. And so
hmm
just being very clear about what advancement means for you, what you're and how it connects back to your core values is super important. And then just reframing how you approach, you know, relationship building. So if we want to take
absolutely.
networking, if networking is a dirty word to you, then let's remove it and let's talk about relationship building, right? How are you going to
Exactly.
build relationships that are meaningful, that are sustainable, where they're
hmm
reciprocal, where you're adding value to each other? How do you do that, and how are you going to invest time in that? I think if we can reframe those things, I think most people are going to be in a better place to proactively work on them.
Absolutely. And I just want to circle back to what you said. That's another really important point you mentioned about making sure that we are mindful of what our goals are, our career goals, or maybe the contribution we want to make, and linking your network, making sure that it's aligned with that, so that you understand why you're doing this. If you're, for example, you're interested in making a career move, maybe to a new organization or a new function, you understand what that goal is, and then you can start to identify how making connection and building connection can help you achieve that. Or maybe it's even broader when you're thinking about the contribution you'd like to make in the world, thinking about that and then thinking about, well, how can connection and building meaningful relationship help you contribute more? So that point about linking this back to or situating it in your larger purpose, I think is very important. And those are different strategies that help you reframe how you think about networking.
Yeah, excellent. And all of this then helps you to build those relationships of mutual accountability and trust with your team, with other key individuals and cross-functional teams across the business, with other key stakeholders, with suppliers, with buyers, and whatever you're talking about. It helps you to build those relationships. And you never know. I mean, you don't know how long you're going to be with your current company. And so you may plan on being there for 10 years or for the rest of your career, or you might be gone tomorrow. You never know. And things can happen almost seemingly overnight sometimes. And major disruptions can occur. You may, things that are important to you today may not be as important to you in 5 years. And so you may
Mm,
reshift, shift your own kind of values prioritization over time throughout your life and throughout your career. So we always want to make sure that we're building multiple pathways in different
hmm
directions to keep doors open for us. I reflect, I'm a university teacher. I know you teach also. I often tell my students, I'm older than most of my students. I do have non-traditional students that sometimes take my courses, or exec ed. I have older
Mm-hmm.
people that are in those programs. But the kind of the average university student, they're much younger than me. I'm further in my career, etc. But I always tell them, I'm like, I want to stay in touch with you. You're going to leave here. You're going to go off, start your career. You're going to go in different paths. I might be at this point in time, I might be ahead of you, quote unquote, ahead in my career
Mm-hmm.
just because I've been at it longer. But 10 years from now, who knows? I love being a professor. So I hope I'm still a professor, but who knows? And maybe I'm going to come to you for a job someday, right? So I want to keep
Absolutely.
those relationships going and sustain them over time. And the
Exactly.
same thing, for whatever organization we happen to be in, you never know when that person that you used to work with who has left for another company in a couple of years from now, you might want to go work with them or for them or whatever. So keep those relationships alive.
Absolutely. And there are so many different things that you can do that are really almost like the low-hanging fruit. It doesn't have networking. A lot of times people associate it with an event, but networking is much more of a state of mind and a practice. And what we really want to be thinking about is how can I actually intentionally design my practice in a way that's aligned with my personality, my goals, and my values, so that I can achieve my goals and also contribute in a way that's important for me. So there's a lot of agency too when you start to take charge, to choose how to engage in your practice. And I always encourage people to find what works for them. So, we talk about different kinds of strategies. Maybe one is about building your expertise or sharing your expertise, which are two great strategies, or, looking inside and outside your organization for opportunities, speaking or gathering events. There's many different things that you can do, but what's important is you identify what's going to work for you. If you happen to be a very strong introvert and the idea of running a workshop is overwhelming, or even attending a conference, then maybe you start with something small. But the point is that there are things, it doesn't have to be all or nothing. What we want to try and do is find out what's going to work for you, and then identify specific behaviors and actions that you can take that are going to get you closer to building those relationships, whatever that might mean for you at a given point in time.
Yeah, yeah, excellent. And so all of this then not only can help to create the types of pathways that can bring you to your next future opportunity that you don't even know about right now,
Mm,
right? But they can also help you to build your network of influence, whether it's in your current
absolutely.
job or future opportunities. I often tell either it's people if I'm coaching them or students that are in my classes or participants in workshops, I often talk about the things that I have done oftentimes a decade or more ago have laid the groundwork for things that I'm doing today. So the successes I'm having now, the opportunities I'm having now, don't
Mhm.
they haven't just magically occurred. Now sometimes there are things that bubble up and you're like, oh, that's fortuitous, whatever. But oftentimes it's been systematic effort over
Mhm.
time for years, sometimes decades, that then will open doors and create opportunities for those future things that you want to try to do or pivots you want to make in your career. So most of the successes that I have today, I can map back. If I take the time and reflect on it, I can map them
Mhm.
back to other decisions that I've made over time for many, many years, and those interactions, those relationships that I've built. And so we don't want to shortchange our future selves by not putting in the
No.
time and the effort today to start to build that influence.
Absolutely. And I think just building on what you said, not only are you possibly advancing your career, you have the opportunity to help others advance. The more you have, particularly as a manager or a leader, the more you're able to extend to your direct reports. You can also mentor, you can serve as an ally. So you're not just advancing your career, you're advancing careers, yours and others. You also, when you're doing this, you get to contribute. You can accomplish, you can contribute more because you have a wider range or a pool of people, partners, opportunities, which is wonderful that you can tap into, and then you have their networks as potential areas that you can also explore as well. You can also access more support and also give more support. It also, as you talked about earlier, it also activates creativity and innovation. It advances learning and growth, which you see and you experienced yourself in your journey, and certainly I have too. And then it also allows us to amplify our voice, which is a form of building influence. Now, I like the idea of amplifying our voice as well, because I think it's also about, sharing what's important, what you want to share as part of your self-actualization journey, or maybe your professional goals. It's also energizing, and it creates this sense of belonging. And then also very practically, you can build your reputation and also build your thought leadership. So it's very, there's that very pragmatic side as well as part of building your influence. So a lot of opportunity. And I think that sometimes, because there's so much negative association with the word, and that's why I like to, interchange. It's about building relationship, making connection, and, networking, or the concept formerly known as networking, if I do a kickback to Prince. So I think that it's really important that we not throw the baby out with the bathwater here. If, like you said, if it's a term that is unpalatable to you, use a different one. But the point is what you really want to do is make sure that you engage in building these relationships and nurturing the relationships. And as you said, you can actually trace back many of your successes to prior relationships you've had. So we want to be mindful of that and really, again, design something that works for us. And there's a lot of option out there to do that.
Yeah, very well said. Palena, this has just been a really great conversation. I note the time. I need to let you go here in just a few minutes, but before we wrap things up for today, I wanted to give you a chance to share with the audience how they can connect with you, find out more about your work, your team, and then give us the final word on the topic for today.
Okay, well, if people would like to connect with me, I think the easiest place to find me is on my website, which is www.unabridgedleadership.com. And that's one word, unabridged leadership. It's about bringing your whole self as a leader. And I have many free downloads and resources that I encourage people to check out. I think in terms of a final word, I think it's important that we view networking as a state of mind. It's something that we can develop. It's a practice. It requires nurturing and attending to, like any other practice. We can do that through some mindful preparation, and that often is very good, practically speaking, for people who feel uncomfortable networking, in terms of calming your nerves and actually preparing you for different encounters. And I think it's also really important, I would want to say, to make sure that we exercise self-care in the process, especially for introverts and people who actually find this difficult. It's important to manage our energy. It's also important to acknowledge that you have taken a step and you've done something, not only to boost your self-awareness as part of your emotional intelligence, but also to celebrate what you've done. And I think it's very important that we celebrate these milestones that we take. And that might be, especially for introverts, taking some downtime if this is something that does feel very energy provoking. So again, making sure that we tend to ourselves in the process. So design your practice, your relationship building practice, as a way to support your goals and your leadership, and continue to focus on creating more value for everyone.
I love it. Thank you, Palena. It's been a real pleasure talking with you. I appreciate you sharing your time, your insights, your wisdom with all of us. I encourage my audience to reach out, get connected, find out more about what Palena can do for you. And as always, I hope everyone can stay healthy and safe, that you can find meaning and purpose at work each and every day.